It's over 2 years since the Capaldi era began. Watch on to find out why I love it so much. Hello everyone and welcome back to Defending Doctor Who Series 9. Now, as I mentioned last week, this week's review is going to be a little bit different to usual, mainly because Heaven Sent is regarded so highly by Doctor Who fans anyway, so while I could spend 20 minutes defending it and picking out all the best bits that we all know and love, there's not much point in doing that in my eyes. So instead, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach, still looking at Heaven Sent and the 12th Doctor and his character and his writing, but kind of widening out to cover all of Series 8 and 9. And in particular, because this story focuses on the 12th Doctor so much, he's the only character and it's all about him, and it's a perfect example of him being written for well, I kind of want to address a couple of things. The first of these being the accusations that go around quite a lot about how Capaldi as an actor has been written badly and thus underused on Doctor Who and is yet to reach his full potential. And then I also want to talk about whether Capaldi as a Doctor, just generally, if he's worked with the general audience, if he's to blame for the lack of public interest, or if it's the writing, or if it's something else completely, and then also the more recent rumours about him leaving the series after Series 10, and I'll basically conclude discussing whether this should happen or not, and what the consequences will be if it does happen. So to start with, let's cast our minds back to the 23rd of August 2014, when Peter Capaldi made his first full appearance as the Doctor in Deep Breath, and Series 8 of the revived show started. Now, the audience reaction at first was a little bit shaky. I mean, I remember at the time, I kind of felt that particularly in that first scene, his Scottish accent would take a little bit of getting used to, and I couldn't quite make out what he was saying at times. But obviously as the story developed and the series developed, this wasn't as much of an issue. It was clear from the start that the 12th Doctor was going to be a darker, more pragmatic and mysterious incarnation than those that we'd seen most recently in the past, and in particular in the revived series. Capaldi himself is many years older than Matt Smith, and quite a bit older than David Tennant and Christopher Eccleston, although not so much on that last one. But it's the first time since the classic series that we've had such an old Doctor, and indeed he was the oldest actor to start playing the part, because I think Bill Hartnell was older than him when he finished the role, but not when he started. So, compared to Matt Smith's 11th Doctor, this is a major shift. I mean, you've got him, the 11th Doctor, who is kind of more to the audience, and particularly to the younger audience, I suppose. He's more of a sort of friend, you could argue, or older brother type figure, because even though the Doctor is really old, this one looks quite youthful. And then going straight on to Capaldi, yes, younger viewers can still relate to him as an older figure, as a kind of father, grandfather maybe, but there's a big gap between older brother and grandfather, and I do wonder maybe whether this is one of the reasons why the general public wasn't so interested in Doctor Who, and still isn't, when Series 8 and 9 are airing, because it's not a problem really with Peter Capaldi himself, because, I mean, us as fans and older people, older viewers, generally we think he's a lot better than previous Doctors, because of his age and his experience and his gravitas. But part of me just does wonder whether for the younger viewers in particular, this put them off. Because you can't really argue that not as many younger kids kind of get excited about Doctor Who these days. I mean, look at Doctor Who Adventures. It's now published monthly, as opposed to weekly or even fortnightly. There's flagging sales of action figures. We've got this big gap in the action figure market between cheaper to produce 3.75-inch figures with bad paint jobs, but they do the job for younger viewers, for kids who want to play with them. And then we've got older viewers from teenage upwards kind of, who are more collectors. There's quite a divide there between kids playing with figures and things, and magazines and books and all that kind of stuff, and collecting, and the way we as older viewers collect things and figures, merchandise, magazines, things like that. And I think, well, that divide wasn't always there. Take the 5-inch figures, for example. They did the job for kids, you know, for us, when we were that age. The same age that people are now, that the 3.75-inch figures are aimed at. So why have things changed? Obviously it's down to the economy and things like that, but also I think to some extent the lack of interest for Doctor Who generally and Doctor Who merchandise from younger audiences is really because with all this new technology, you know, with kids having iPods, iPhones, computers, tablets, things like action figures and even magazines and even books really aren't as relevant. I mean, I know I've kind of gone off on a tangent here about action figures, which wasn't what I planned to do, but still, you kind of get my point. I think really one of the main factors why kids aren't as keen on Capaldi isn't because of Capaldi himself, though some of the stuff is down to that, their reaction to an older Doctor and the transition between him and Matt Smith's Doctor. But also I think just because kids have changed so much since we were that age, and there's not an awful lot you can do about that. I mean, let's go back to that article now from the Mirror that was published recently about how they want to have a younger Doctor and sidekick. And there are two things I have to say about this really. The first of these is that this whole idea of having a younger Doctor, a younger companion, may or may not work. I mean, it might help bringing new audiences in, new viewers, and getting kids interested again, if true, of course, because, you know, we take this all with a pinch of salt. But there is that general idea present where people are saying that while Capaldi is good, the show needs to be more attractive to the general public. I think from fans in particular, surprisingly, as well as general audience members, there's an enormous amount of pressure for that to happen. And my concern really with this whole thing about having a younger actor playing the Doctor, a younger actress playing the companion, while it may not actually work, it may not succeed because of the way viewers have changed, there's also another strand to it. And that is, personally for me, my idea of Doctor Who is, and this may come as a bit of shock to some people, but my idea of Doctor Who is not that, really. I know the show has to kind of, to some extent, it has to fit the mould. It has to kind of reflect the time that it's being broadcast and being recorded, and the overall aesthetic of the show, the feel of the show, the writing as well. It all kind of adds up to that. But I don't think the BBC should try and rebrand Doctor Who in that way just to make young people watch the show again. I honestly don't think that would actually work. And it would be such a shame when we've got this current state of the show, which I'm going to go on to talk about later on, but with Series 8 and Series 9, which I regard so highly, such an improvement, and with Capaldi's Doctor as well, who is a huge part of that, I don't think it's a wise idea for the BBC to even consider doing what this Mirror article suggests. It may come as a bit of a surprise to you to learn that I'm not a massive fan, looking back, of the RTD era. I mean, I loved it when I was watching it as a kid, which is all fine, you know, I suppose. It could be argued. But looking back, I just found it so romantic, so camp, kind of a bit too comedic. It wasn't subtle like Capaldi's funny, dark, you know, moments of black comedy. It wasn't like that. And looking back, it is so soppy as well with the 10th Doctor. While I do respect the choices that Russell T Davies made, and I still do like, overall, well, some of his series and some of his episode and story arcs, that was Doctor Who being rebranded for a whole new audience back in 2005 with Series 1. And it was a big change from what we'd seen before, you know, the end of the McCoy era, the TV movie, although it wasn't quite so different. But the point still stands. Doctor Who, to some extent, had to kind of be redeveloped and rebranded to fit the mould of a new audience. And I kind of, partially inside, I kind of fear that if they did that again, with the whole thing about young Doctor, young companion, making the show generally a lot more soapy, dare I use that word, That's not something I personally want to see. And yes, I'm not the only Doctor Who fan out there, and other people have opinions as well, but I'm not entirely convinced personally whether that would actually solve the problem or not. And I know there are a lot of people that agree with me. To put this into context, at my school, there are very, very few people who actively watch Doctor Who. And even if there are more people that don't admit to it, you know, still, that's not a good place to be in. And really, I've kind of come to accept this. There's not a lot in my head, I think, that you could do to change that opinion, to make Doctor Who attractive again to that kind of demographic, without altering it so much that it lost the whole quintessential element that makes Doctor Who special. And to put it completely bluntly, I myself would rather really that Doctor Who had its time and died a good death, than it had to be restructured and reformatted so much that that was the case, and it became something that was unrecognisable as Doctor Who anymore. I'm not saying we've had that in the past thus far, or that there is a danger of that happening in the future, although it could possibly happen at some stage, I don't know. Society is changing all the time, and viewing audiences are changing all the time. I think it's just striking that balance between us as fans and the general audience, and finding something that works, and without letting Doctor Who get to one of the two extremes of either being completely designed for the general viewers or completely designed for the fans. Now, I often hear things about fan service, fan baiting, all that kind of stuff, and yes, I can appreciate that to a certain extent the show these days is much more aimed at fans than it is at the general audience. But I've kind of already touched on already why I don't think this is a massive problem. You know, if the general audience aren't that interested in the show anymore, there's no point trying to make it fit their interests in order for it to be popular and make money and to do well. Because it is already doing well at the moment as it is, which is why, while it does need a bit of a shake-up as a brand, particularly on the merchandising front, I don't think there's a lot that can be done and that should be done. But at the end of the day, a lot of the blame comes down to Stephen Moffat. Now, I don't know about you, the actual viewer watching this, but I've heard a lot of accusations about Moffat's writing affecting Capaldi's time on the show, as I've already mentioned multiple times throughout this series. And basically, I do not think this is true. I know that people have opinions that differ to that, but allow me to explain. Basically, with Capaldi's Doctor, right from the get-go, right in Series 8, Moffat did something different. He completely shook up the character of the Doctor and kind of put more mystery into him. The whole thing about a good man, while it does sort of come out of nowhere, am I a good man? That question, while it's sort of a little bit spontaneous, if you like, I think it works well. And if you kind of don't concentrate on how that came about, which is obviously something on Trent's Law with him growing old and kind of, you know, changing his views on things and starting to question his own, you know, life. But if you kind of look past that and just look at it as an individual thing, for Series 8 it works wonders as a story arc. The whole story arc of Series 8 is something I really admire, because on the one hand it's all about Capaldi and his Doctor and him questioning whether he's a good man or not, and in the end he realises, you know, no, I'm an idiot. Basically, he's no more special than anybody else, and to me that makes the Doctor more human and relatable, and much more human and relatable, I think, than David Tennant going around, you know, snogging people and being embarrassing and cringy, if I'm perfectly honest. I think in the Capaldi era there's a big thing about the Doctor making mistakes and learning from them, and that sort of leads me on to the hybrid story arc, which I will discuss in much more detail next week. But to sum up really the hybrid story arc, the Series 9 arc, the whole thing, the three-part finale of Series 9 is all about the Doctor having everything taken away from him. As I discussed last week, he's got no TARDIS, no Clara, nothing. He's just by himself and cold and emotionless and angry. And he's sent into his confession dial in Heaven Sent, and by the end of it, you know, he's ready to kick some Time Lord ass, and he does, and he makes mistakes. He goes too far, but then regrets it afterwards. And the whole thing, I think, about Clara wiping his memory, that kind of allows him to move forward. He remembers that he's gone too far, but he doesn't remember the details, which allows him to kind of put it behind him, if you like, while still learning from it. And yeah, I think actually there's a massive emphasis with the 12th Doctor behind his persona of, you know, this very dark, mysterious character. He's actually a lot more relatable than many of the previous incarnations of the Doctor that we've seen, which is quite an interesting point. Looking specifically at Moffat's writing and the episodes he's overseen in Series 8 and Series 9, if I'm perfectly honest, I don't really see where this potential problem lies. I mean, I suppose with Series 8 and to some extent Series 9, but more so with Series 8, the main complaint was about the show being called Clara Who, in inverted commas, and not enough emphasis on the 12th Doctor. But I beg to differ, because the whole Am I a Good Man arc, which ends with the Doctor declaring he's an idiot, at that final speech in Death in Heaven, that's not about Clara, that's about the Doctor. But it's through Clara's relationship with Danny Pink, and how Danny suffers as a result of her connection with the Doctor, and travelling with the Doctor. It's that's kind of like a lens, if you like, which allows us to see the Doctor from new and different perspectives. I suppose Clara is the companion, she's a point of identification for the audience, and faced with such a different Doctor, she is the one that we go on a journey with, and there are ups and downs, like Kill the Moon, when she has that massive outburst at him, but again that allows us to explore both characters, which we think is right as the audience, because it was fairly 50-50. Some people agree with Clara and some people agree with the Doctor, but it's scenes like that where they fall out, or just scenes where they interact. My main point here is that they allow us to see the Doctor in a new light, and it's not all about Clara. Clara is just one way in which we can access the 12th Doctor and explore his character. Then moving on to Series 9, the main complaint is a bit more obvious here. It's all about the rocker Doctor, in inverted commas. The whole thing where he's kind of, well, to some extent rebranded as this rocker granddad kind of character. But yeah, I think really it's quite a natural development because of Capaldi's development through Series 8, through his mellowing as a Doctor, and then, yeah, you know, in Series 9, he's a bit more indulgent, he can have a bit more fun, and then when he loses Clara at the end, that kind of emphasises it a bit more, because if the Doctor had been moody and mysterious throughout the whole of Series 9, where would the contrast have been? Where would the impact have been when he suddenly snaps like that, when Ishilda reveals that Clara's fate is sealed? I mean, yes, I can understand why some people might not like the whole image of the Doctor with a guitar, and particularly with the sonic sunglasses, but I've mentioned already on this channel in various videos why I think they're pretty cool, the sunglasses. And in my top 10 sonic screwdrivers and devices video, I did actually mention how I thought it was a bit ridiculous that all the technology could fit in the frame of the sunglasses, and I've had a fair few comments back actually, saying that the explanation that it's just Time Lord technology, as in bigger on the inside, works well enough for them. And I completely agree with that actually. I can't really believe I didn't think of that before. But yes, of course, they're bigger on the inside, and that's how the technology can fit inside there. The whole idea behind the sunglasses, as well as adding to the Doctor's rocker persona, was also to give a bit of variation, as an alternative for the sonic screwdriver. And ironically, many of the fans who complained about the sonic sunglasses actually kind of petitioned to get rid of the sonic screwdriver for a bit, and to not have that. And for me, this is actually a really refreshing change, because for one, the sunglasses are a lot more stylish, and also by having that visual interface with Doctor being able to look at things and press and turn them on, or having little screens and computer scanners and things there, you know, in his eyesight, it adds a new dimension to sonic technology, and all in all, yeah, it's just really refreshing and really interesting. As for the whole thing with the guitar, I quite like it as a musician myself. I mean, yeah, I will admit, I'm not really that into rock music, but it's just nice to see the Doctor going around with an instrument and using it throughout the series, rather like the second Doctor with his recorder in his first few stories. And of course, in the end, in Hellbent, this actually allows the Doctor to express his memories of Clara as a song by playing it on the guitar, which is a beautiful touch, and it definitely makes the guitar seem a lot more relevant as a kind of plot point, as an arc in itself. So I appreciate this hasn't been much of a review of Heaven Sent, but more of a look at Capaldi's era and how he's been treated and written over Series 9 and Series 8. And I hope you agree with some of my points, and, you know, that they're thought-provoking and stimulate some interesting debates and arguments in the comments section below. Just if you're wondering, yes, I absolutely love Heaven Sent. I explained a little bit more in my top 10 Doctor episodes video, in which it was third, I think. But just to sum up, great writing, fantastic performances, and the directing from Rachel to Lily is just absolutely superb. And of course, the tension builds all the way to the end, to that fantastic climax and the cliffhanger, where the Doctor is back on Gallifrey. There are a couple of points that I want to go over, but I'm going to save them for next week, and they concern the hybrid, the Doctor claiming that he knows what the hybrid is when he's in the confession dial, and then at the end, the very controversial moment when he declares the hybrid is me. Don't fret, because I'm going to cover them next week. I've got quite a bit to say, thought about them lots, and they're going to be included with Hellbent next week in a video that not only defends Hellbent, but Series 9 overall and the Series 9 arc of the hybrid, which is something that I feel quite passionately about. So I've decided not to include viewer comments this week, but I am going to take a look at some Twitter polls that I ran earlier in the week just to sum up my points and hopefully reinforce it. First, I asked the general question, do you think Capaldi's skill as an actor has been done justice by the writing of his episodes? And there was quite an overwhelming no there, 57%, over half, which, yeah, I found a little bit surprising, but hopefully this video sort of has made you think about that a little bit more and reconsider. I don't know. But at the time, I wanted to explore this further, so I ran identical polls for both David Tennant and Matt Smith's 10th and 11th incarnations, and as you can see, there was an overwhelming yes for both of them, particularly for David Tennant, and much fewer voters voted for the no and no solid opinion unsure options. And my point here is that Peter Capaldi, when he came into the role of the Doctor, unlike Matt Smith and David Tennant, he was a known actor with lots of experience. He's much older than them, as I've already mentioned, and I think because he wasn't a newcomer, because we'd already seen him in other things and knew what he could do, I think perhaps certain fans and viewers maybe had that image in their head of what the 12th Doctor should be like before he was even on the telly, and that's kind of carried on throughout his era. And for some people, him and the writing aren't quite matching that image in their head. And I think that's purely because he's not a newcomer. You know, you couldn't have said for Matt Smith, oh, he's not fulfilling my expectations, he's being written for badly, because we had nothing to compare it to at the time when he took over the role of the 11th Doctor. The final poll of that evening was, should Capaldi stay after Series 10? Again, there was a very overwhelming yes for the option about having him stay on and do Series 11 with Chibnall, but in this poll there was a bit more of a balance between the other options as well. And really, to hear my thoughts on this, please go and watch the video that 5 Who fans have created about why Capaldi should leave after Series 10. Apart from the bits about Capaldi not getting much character development throughout Series 8 and 9, I agree with most of the points made in that video, and it really made me reconsider and think that perhaps, yeah, it is better for Chibnall to have a clean, new slate, as this Mirror article suggests, and, you know, to not have too much of a good thing, to let Capaldi finish with Moffat and have that ending point and move on to something else. So again, thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's been long and different from usual, but hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully it's made you think about your own views and reconsider them. Please argue against any of my points below in the comments, and I will do my best, and I will read and listen to every single one of your opinions, and then have my say. If there's anything that I've said that you think is wrong, again, argue against that, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, or given another opinion, because that's what this whole process, this whole series is about really, about accepting other people's opinions. I'll be back next week for one final time to review the hugely controversial Hellbent, so I'll see you then for that. But until then guys, bye for now.